The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to today's webinar. As we're closing out the year, we want to share a few product management best practices with you to help you to start 2018 with a bang. My name is Andre Toys, and I'm the Director of Marketing for Product Plan, and I will be your moderator today. But before we start, I would like to know who do we have on the line today so we can make sure that we address the content in this webinar specifically to you. Let me launch this poll here. And if everybody can take a moment and answer this poll. So if you're in product management, please select that. If you're marketing on sales, there's another option for you, etc., etc. So I give everybody a few seconds to submit this polling question. All right, looks like lots of people have voted. Let me share the results here. We have 66% who are in product management on the line. Perfect. And the second largest group is engineering and development. We have lots of recommendations for you as well. And it's not unusual that product management works very closely with engineering and development. Then we have members from executive teams, a few folks in marketing and sales, and a few other job titles. Fantastic. We have some great content for you today. So today's webinar is brought to you by the Product Stack. We are a group of like-minded organizations, and our goal is to offer you some practical solutions in order to improve your product management skills. This year, we have done 3 live events, one in Los Angeles, one in Denver, and one in Portland. And I believe this is our 3rd, if not 4th webinar that we have been doing together as a team. And in those events and webinars, we want to share practical advice for you. We have also started a Slack channel. If you go to theproductstack.com, you can join our Slack channel for free. We just surpassed the 500 member mark, so I would highly recommend everybody to sign up on our Slack account and share your advice with the community. And the 3 companies behind this group is Product Plan, Pivotal Tracker, and Notion. So first, I would like to welcome today's panel. Our first speaker will be Annie. Annie has worked with product and engineering teams for the last 15 years to bring technology products to the market. Prior to Product Plan, she worked with teams at Elite Meetings, Logic Monitor, Blue Casa Communications, and Microsoft. Annie is a very experienced product manager, and I'm happy to have her here today. Welcome, Annie. Next up is Dan. Dan is Pivotal Labs VP and General Manager of Pivotal Tracker, the popular project collaboration tool for modern software teams. Dan has been with Pivotal Labs since their nascent days in the mid-2000s and has experience in every aspect of software development, including engineering, product management, and UX design. Welcome, Dan. Next up is Kevin. Kevin is a co-founder and head of product at Notion. He's a full-stack product designer with over 10 years of experience in designing, researching, marketing, planning, and building products, from package design and big box retailers to indie games in the App Store. His passion is for designing experiences that make our lives easier and more enjoyable. Welcome, Kevin. So in today's webinar, our panelists will give you some concrete recommendations on how to step back, interpret the past, this last year, and how to best align yourself for a successful 2018. First, Annie will be speaking about product planning recommendations. And then we will hear from Dan, who will give some recommendations on how to improve your team management skills. And then Kevin will talk about how you can improve your time management and just your personal product management career skills. And my favorite part of this webinar, and in my opinion, the big advantage of joining live is the Q&A session. And I would encourage everybody to submit questions during the webinar at any time using the questions panel. And we will answer the questions as well as we collect questions. And then at the live Q&A session, we'll try to address as many questions as possible. I would also like to thank everybody for submitting all those questions during the registration. We've gotten well over 100 questions, and we looked at all of those, and we tried to address as many as possible during the course of the webinar. And we've also picked a few questions that we're planning on answering later. But without further ado, I hand it over to Annie, who will be giving her recommendations on product planning. Annie, please take it away.
Great, thanks, Andre. As Andre mentioned, I'm Annie here with Product Plan. I'm Director of Product and excited to be here with you all today. I think we're going to start with a quick poll. How far out do you roadmap? Give everybody a few minutes to answer. Let's see. Great, let's see. Oh, this is interesting. So less than 3 months, about 20%. The majority are 3 to 6 months. And we're looking at about a third that's 6 months to a year. That's interesting, and it's shortened a bit in terms of results we've seen in the past. That's great. That's great that people are a little more flexible. Perfect. Okay, well, let's start with some of the planning that goes in behind all of those roadmaps, the end of year retrospective. It is very likely that you or members of your team, people that you work with, are doing retrospectives on a regular basis, taking a look at what went well, what didn't go well, and how to improve in the next sprint or next iteration. The end of year is a great time to do this for your entire business, to take a look at what your assumptions were going into 2017 and what went well, what went better than anticipated, what was not anticipated. There might have been forecasted performance numbers, expectations around market behavior, and most importantly, it's important to look at why those things did behave differently than expected. Understanding why will help in your planning for next year. It's really easy for us to get wrapped up in the momentum of everything we have to do, but there's some really good insights in those retrospectives. We do have a good portion of product managers joining us today, and as product people, we spend a lot of time setting and measuring KPIs. This is a great time to step back and look to see if there are any broad trends or unexpected results in those KPIs. Do we regularly underestimate usage numbers, or are we overestimating how much work can be done in a sprint? Checking those assumptions at the end of the year is a great start to looking at how you're going to set up 2018. Here at Product Plan, we also take the opportunity to look at our 2017 roadmap and see how we performed and what we did deliver in comparison to what we thought would happen. That really helped us set up the right size of dev teams and our expected velocity as we went into our 2018. As Confucius said, study the past if you will define the future. So with that, we'll go right over into the analysis. With some history behind you, it's time to look at the current state of the business and the product. This is actually the one time I recommend setting your roadmap aside entirely. We all spend a lot of time looking at the market and what's happening on a competitive basis. End of the year is a great time to just do some situational planning. What would you do today if you could do anything? And it's not that you're going to drop everything, but it's a great time to look at those insights and sort of check the market, see where you want to be and where you're headed. And did anything come out of your retrospective that changes how you look at your product today? Again, you're probably not going to drop everything, but it might cause a shift in prioritization. If you take the example of a mobile app company, they are likely working on improving and adding to an iOS and Android app. But if you take a look at the market, it's possible the smartwatch adoption and traction has accelerated much more quickly than they anticipated. It's a good time to ask if the right thing to do is to continue on the trend they are around the iOS app, or if they might need to invest in some smartwatch functionality. You may find at the end of this exercise that your roadmap from 2017 rolls right over into 2018, and that's great. That happens commonly. But I challenge you to make sure that that is a conscious decision, not just one that's based on momentum and sunk costs. So lastly, I recommend taking some time to be aspirational. And this is the fun and ideally productive part of our jobs. I can reasonably guess that you want your product to generate more revenue, but what's the customer benefit you really aspire to deliver this year and going forward? You are constantly, as a product manager, defining the why behind your roadmap. And of course, as all of the other members of the team need to understand that as well. And clear product aspirations can really help with this. Here I have in the example of Amazon Prime. They set out a few years ago with the aspiration of delivering packages to your door faster than you could get them at the store, which of course seemed crazy at the time, but it's something they're getting really close to. Now that's more than a rallying cry. That really helps in the product management and planning process to make prioritization decisions. If a product manager is looking at the choice between improving UI functionality or improving something that will increase delivery times, they know that that delivery time functionality is core to the business and what they need to do. Another way to approach aspirations is with an even over that exercise. I'm recognizing you can't be everything to everyone. In the case of Amazon, this might have been, we will deliver faster, even over providing a better user experience. It's not that they don't want to provide a good user experience, but it's great if you can clearly define what the compromises are that you're willing to make in order to achieve what you need to in the year. Again, that really helps with the product prioritization. It really helps setting stakeholder expectations. And if that's defined, the company has an alignment around priorities and communicating successes to the business and the customer. So if looking at a specific example, in the past I've worked with a SaaS company who decided that they needed to increase market share even over increasing average revenue per customer. Now, of course, they want both, but they identified that it was worth trying to gain more customers in the year than just increasing revenue. This was tremendously helpful as a product manager, because I was able to use that guideline to identify the 3 ways that my product was most dramatically going to impact that specific goal. And we specifically focused on features around increasing referrals, which meant we were picking improvements and enhancements that would help our current customer base, even over new products that might generate new revenue. We were also able to identify that we were losing 20% of sales due to a specific function feature set. We then were able to put some high prioritization around that feature set with a measurable goal of decreasing that sales loss number. And then when we looked at why people were buying the product, we could see that it was commonly a consolidation of their tools. This was a little more vague, but it certainly gave us something to measure to, where we had a focus around tool consolidation and integrations, decreasing time in other tools to help move that business objective, increasing market share. Along with being able to explain the why of each of our initiatives, we were able to tie it back to the business objective, which really built some excitement around what we were doing. Again, communication is key out of all of this planning. That's the one thing I'm really hoping you walk away with, is the ability to communicate what the company is doing, why you're doing it, to build that alignment and momentum for a successful 2018. I personally take those themes and use them as legends in a roadmap. And here's an example based on the example I just walked through. Really helps people visualize why we're doing what we're doing and where the benefits are of the projects that we're working on. I'm also very commonly seeing people take those themes and use them as swim lanes so that you can start to see where some of that work is weighted. It's a great way to explain not only what the priorities are, but why they're the right priorities for the business. So all of that work, ideally your outcomes, you have an updated roadmap with themes and objectives and some clear presentation around why you're doing what you're doing, a really company-wide understanding of what the customer benefits and business objectives that you look to deliver to in the year are, and then a prioritization framework. There is plenty of work for all of us to do, plenty of work that we're doing, but having some clear guidelines of where the priorities are for your product and the business will really help for a successful 2018. I do recommend that you go through a similar process for your team. Make sure you take some time at the end of year for the retrospective, looking at what went well, what you could do better. Make sure that's an open conversation and really listen to new members of the team. They commonly have insights They're not as used to the processes and the day-to-day as some of the people that have been there a little bit longer. Same with the analysis. What do you want to accomplish this year? Discuss your opportunities and challenges. And do a little aspirational team planning. What does a stellar team look like? What do you want the company to be saying about your team? What do you want customers to know about your team? And how are you going to accomplish that this year? And then lastly, a similar process for your career. Ideally, you're talking to your boss on a regular basis and leadership about expectations, but the end of the year is a great time to look back and see how well you have set those expectations, how well the year went, and then take a moment to ask your boss, what does a great 2018 for you look like? What are the 3 things that you can accomplish to show that you are doing what is expected or more than is expected? And similarly, what are the 3 things you could do to show that you're ready for the next career move? And small plug, we did just release the productplan.com the product plan career guide, which is at productplan.com/career guide. It's a great way to align you and your boss around what those steps look like, and where you need to grow and improve to better set yourself up for 2018. So I will leave things at that. I know Dan and Kevin have a lot more to say on the team and personal side, and we'll be here at the Q&A to answer questions.
Thanks so much, Annie. I saw a few questions coming in, and people wanted to know where the Slack channel is of the product manager community. If you go to theproductstack.com, you can join for free, and then you can help each other and share questions and hopefully answers as well. And then as questions were coming in, quick reminder, please use the question panel and ask a question. We collect the best questions and answer them at the end. So next up is Dan from Pivotal Tracker, and Dan wants to give you some recommendations on how to improve your team management skills. Dan, please take it away.
Thank you, Andre, and thank you, Annie, for some great advice that I know our team will actually really benefit from as we're in the midst of doing a lot of that planning for next year, and we're finding it pretty difficult. So thank you. And excuse me, I have a bit of a cold, so hopefully it won't get in the way. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the same things that Annie discussed, but we'll dive into a little bit of a lower level of detail. My focus is on, making teams work well, right? Being able to execute well based on a good new roadmap for the year. So as always, we're going to start with a little poll. If we can jump to that, Andre. And so I'm curious about how often your team or teams hold retrospectives. Okay, we'll just give it a few more seconds. But thank you for submitting your votes. Okay, so it seems like most of us, or more than half of you, do retrospectives every few weeks or months, and I would say that's very typical. Some do it more often. Some are just getting started, and perhaps the rest of us haven't actually had an opportunity to try retrospectives. So let's start with talking about retrospectives. I know Annie talked about this a little bit, but I'll dive a little bit deeper. Let's say at the team level, right? This is, and maybe just to set some context, my background, or the last, as long as I remember, I've been at Pivotal, and Pivotal is known for certain things. Pivotal is known for some of these agile practices like pair programming and test-driven development, and a lot of those practices have evolved over the years, right? But the one thing that has remained super stable is this reliance on retrospectives at every level, right? So every team, this is just what you do. You do this every week. There are retrospectives that happen for different functions, right? So in our company, we have HR and recruiting, as an example, holding retros on a regular basis. This is the continuous improvement feedback loop, right? Without retrospectives, it's really hard to know, what's working well, what isn't. Like from your perspective as a product manager, you might think things are great. We're shipping some features. Our customers seem to be happy. They're paying us, right? But there may be some dysfunction. From other perspectives, things may not be working as well as you think, right? The retrospective is the regular, safe place for things to be brought up, right? Things that are working well for recognition and feeling good about accomplishments, as well as things that might not be working so well, or things that people are just puzzled about. A lot of our retrospectives end up with a lot of puzzlers, right? And these are just questions that are an opportunity for us to realize we haven't communicated well with the team, right? This is a great opportunity to reflect on how we're communicating. all those things, right? It's important to make sure that you're not just, venting and talking about stuff and then you forget what you discussed and the same things keep coming up over and over again. Have action items and turn them into actionable things. In our case, we turn them into chores, which is a kind of story and tracker. It goes into the backlogs, right? That way we don't forget to actually take care of the things that we recognize as action items. It's important to make these fun. This is like a social gathering for the team, right? We should be looking forward to it. Again, it happens every week. We don't want to make it boring, right? So wine and cheese is a good theme for this. That's fairly typical. In the summer, some teams will take the team, or some product managers will take their team to the local ice cream shop, right? You get some ice cream and you carve out some area and you do your retro there. Like, it just keeps the team happy and rolling. And again, it's good to do retrospectives, not just for software. It's not just for Scrum teams. It is for everyone. Next slide, please. All right, so on the theme of end of year reflections and getting ready for the new year, software projects are notorious for accumulating way more things that they want to get done, right, than they could actually produce and get out the door, right? Teams that use Pivotal Tracker, it's common for the Icebox to fill up with more and more stories because it's so easy to capture every thought, every idea, every problem, every opportunity as a story. It may be things that you've prioritized previously, but you've had to deprioritize because some other things have come up and you moved them into the Icebox, right? We're at the end of the year. Let's look back. Let's just clean up our house, right? It's no good to have all these things, sitting around, clutter. It's hard to focus on the things that are the most important, right? There's this sort of mindset of guilt because, wow, there's all this stuff that we wanted to do, but we haven't. We just feel guilty about it. It's best to let go of that guilt and start the new year on a fresh note. And it isn't just the Icebox, right? It's, your backlog, you might have been ambitious and you planned, a few months out, and you constantly have that bottom of the backlog that you're just never getting to, right? That's also making you feel bad. It's making you feel like you're not really hitting your accomplishments, right? So it isn't just an end of year thing. Like, on a continuous basis, it's good to just clean things up. With Tracker, you can move some of those old stories to another project. You can export them. Put them into a shared spreadsheet, so you have a reference for what the conversation may have been 6 months ago or a year ago, right? But have a new conversation about the new things, right? The things on the roadmap you will break down, right? Breaking things down into stories is an opportunity for conversation. You want to be basing that conversation on today's priorities, etc. And one thing we've observed with Tracker is that stories tend to either get created in the Icebox and then moved into the backlog fairly quickly, either the same moment or at the next planning session, or they stay in the Icebox. If they stay in the Icebox, they will stay there forever. It's one or the other. It's rare for stories to, be in the Icebox for a few weeks and then get prioritized, right? Because people will start to not trust the things that are there. Finally, and I know this is one of the questions that have been submitted, is how do you manage expectations? What if you promise somebody, a feature and you've got these stories sitting at the bottom of your backlog and you're just not going to get to it? What do you do then? You're carrying this burden of expectations and promises, and I think it's important to set the right expectations right from the onset. Let's say when you build a new roadmap, you want to be an empowered product manager, you want to be an empowered team, and you want to be able to make decisions on a continuous basis as to what's the most important thing right now. So maybe try not to set expectations that are very explicit about dates or when exactly you'll deliver this feature, but more about an expectation of trust. We're going to do the right thing. We're going to listen. We're going to have to make decisions on a continuous basis, which means we may not be able to get to everything. All right, if we could move to the next slide. Okay, so a lot of our thoughts lately have been around this topic, the balanced team, and I'm not sure how commonly this is, how well known this concept is, but there's a big movement around balanced teams, right? It's sort of an organic thing. It sort of been in the lean product, lean UX circles, agile circles, but it isn't tied to any one of those methodologies or movements. It's kind of its own thing, and this is an idea. It's an idea of a team being made up of all the roles that need to work together to solve a problem, to get get something accomplished, right? Whether it's a customer problem, it's a product opportunity, right? But at Pivotal and our teams, we're moving, away from the more traditional product sort of owns the problem first, and they put some time into figuring out what the problem is, how we're going to solve it, maybe even come up with some features, then hand the problem to, or the features to the designer or design team. Then the design team sort of figures out, how the thing should work or what it should look like, and then we hand it to engineers, and the engineers implement this, right? Even with fairly fast cycles, it's still very linear, and people get disconnected from the solution, right? The engineers don't really know how we decided that this button should be over here and this feature should work a certain way, and it leads to lack of trust. It's like people not really working together, right? So balanced teams are really embracing putting all the roles together, right? Having shared goals and doing everything possible to enable that group working together all the time, having all the roles be involved early, right? When we are coming up with some potential solutions for a problem, right? Like, let's do that together. Let's maybe do like a design sprint, get everybody in the same room, engineering, design, and product. Let's really connect with what we're doing here, and that leads to much better outcomes. It leads to happier teams. It leads to teams that can solve problems that are not predicted, right? You may have thought that you need to solve problem X for the customer, but as you get closer to it, you realize there's a different problem. An empowered team like this can sort of do these little pivots. They can figure out what the right thing to do is because they understand the problem well, right? And they're empowered. They can talk to the customer. They can ship code and solve the customer problem directly without having to, delegate to somebody else or rely on some other team to do a certain portion of the solving of the problem. So this is a big thing for us, and I think it's really worth understanding how this works and embracing that. So we talk about empowering teams within, right? Great. So we have a balanced team. We have the right roles, right? They know what the problem is. It aligns with the roadmap or the opportunities or problems on the roadmap. But now, we might need to have multiple teams working on all the things that are on that roadmap on the larger product, right? So one thing that's important to recognize is what's referred to as Conway's law, which says basically that organizations are destined to produce systems which are essentially like copies of their organization, right? So if you have 3 different teams, you're going to end up with essentially three sort of separate products, 3 solutions, right? So what you don't want is multiple teams trying to solve the same problem, working on the same component of your product, the same capability, right? The ideal is that as we're sort of thinking about, what problems to solve, thinking about what teams do we have, how can we reorganize both the teams and the product structure as well as the roadmap so that there is this alignment of team to problem, team and problem to a certain area of your product, right? So that the boundaries align too. This creates better communication. It's clear as to who gets to decide which team owns a certain problem, and it leads to better outcomes. So we're pretty big fans of this, and we're doing a lot of thinking about how we can organize, keeping Conway's law in mind. This is, every team, we've been talking about a lot of collaboration, right? People working together. So communication is obviously a very important aspect of this. End of year, looking at 2018, it's worth stepping back and asking whether the tools that you have, the things that you do are conducive to communication. Are we just cargo culting certain processes because we read a book about a certain agile methodology, so we're going to just do what it tells us to do? Or are we thinking about these techniques like stand-ups and planning meetings, etc., as vehicles for communication, right? And if we think of them that way, then we're more open to optimizing what those things are, how we do stand-ups, whether there's a better answer to staying connected and having a shared sort of kind of culture. Stand-ups are not just status meetings, right? The tools that you use, do they work well? If you have a distributed team, is the video conferencing tool that you're using, does it work well, right? It might work well for the people that are co-located in the same room, but is it working well for the people on the other side of it, right? What if it picks up, all these sounds from people moving plates around on the desk, right? Maybe that's something that you can change and say, hey, from now on, let's not eat breakfast at at the table that we do all our planning meetings in, because it's really annoying for the people on the other side, right? Like these are kind of simple little things, right? But this makes such a big difference in terms of how well the team works together, right? And the piece about co-location versus being distributed, right? Sometimes teams will start co-located, which is great. I mean, that's the optimal place to be, but we may end up with some people that are not in the room over time, right? Like we've sort of gone from being everybody in the same room to gradually having more people that are not in the same office, right? And sometimes you sort of forget the investments you have to make to be an effective distributed team. And those investments should be made early on, not like, okay, we have enough people complaining that they can't hear who's talking in the meetings, they can't be heard, or they're hearing the clanging of the fork on the plate, right? Like that's something that should be fixed when you have your first person that's not in the room, right? So invest in that. There are great tools for that these days. And beware the cat pictures and the animated GIFs in Slack. It's just the bane of our existence now. But again, something worth questioning. Is Slack helping us or is it distracting us, right? And I'll let us ponder the answer to that more collectively. All right, so moving on. So finally, again, we've been talking about teams working together, people working together. This is all collaboration, right? It's not something that just happens, right? Like we have a tendency to gravitate towards, working in isolation, working on our own problems, right? In order to have real teamwork happen, you need to have certain sort of structures and processes in place. There needs to be a culture of it, right? And this is the other thing that Pivotal's really tried to, invest in over the years. And but it's hard. It's something that you continually have to invest in. This breakfast thing. I mean, lots of companies do like breakfast or catered breakfast in the morning. It's considered to be a perk, and like we have to do it for competitive reasons. But that's not actually why we do breakfast. We do breakfast because it brings people together. It starts the day on that right sort of setting, right, in a social context, people talking. It also brings people into the office at the same time, right, which aligns their day. It aligns when they get hungry for lunch, which maximizes opportunity to work together, to collaborate, right? It might be a small thing, but it's a collection of multiple small things like this that makes up for an environment that is conducive and encourages collaboration. And pairing, right? It's just one example. Yes, we pair, but it's not just for programming, right? Like that works well in any context, in any role, especially cross roles on a balanced team, right? Because it breaks those silos, it breaks the communication barriers, it gets people talking, gets people sharing their thoughts, and it all leads to much better environment for product, for getting great products out the door, because it's an outcome of a team effort. And I think it's back to Andre. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Dan. This was great. Great recommendations on how to better collaborate. Thank you. And quick reminder, please continue to use the questions panel to submit questions. I saw lots of great questions that are coming in. So please continue to submit your questions. Next up is Kevin from Notion. And Kevin is talking about a few tips for better time management and also how to just become a better product manager. Kevin, please take it away.
Great. Thanks, Andre. So Dan and Annie have done great jobs of talking about kind of the team and the product. My goal here is to really focus on you, the individual, and kind of hopefully leave you with a couple tips to, as we go into the end of the year, kind of self-reflect and plan for a better 2018 on how you can get better or improve your own skills. So of course, we'll start with a poll first. Yep, there it is. What methods do you use to measure and improve your own professional development? So a couple seconds here. Performance reviews, self-evaluation, quarterly goals, fun stuffs. A couple more seconds, looking good. Cool. Okay, so not surprising, self-evaluation was the highest. Why I say that's not surprising is because I think a lot of people think that they are doing that. Not that I'm not calling anyone out who's not really doing it, but I think that's the easiest thing to do, right? Performance reviews, setting goals, those are kind of a little more labor intensive. Sometimes they involve other team members. And so I do encourage, spending more time around those things. What I'm going to move on with is actually kind of two more kind of self-evaluation things that you can use to get into better habits, and then kind of teach you how you can bring those to some of these other steps here. So yeah, so as a PM, we're pulled in hundreds of different directions, right? And while you're worrying about your product, you're worrying about your team. The big question is like, who's looking after you, right? It's the cobbler's son has no shoes kind of metaphor, where you're often stressed out and then you have zero time to really think about yourself. Next slide, Andre. So you want to be productive, you want to be creative. These are things that are critical to being a successful product manager. The question is, how do you foster productivity? And so I found kind of two things that I do, and they're both tied to this idea of frequency, though. As Aristotle says, we are what we repeatedly do, right? Excellence is not an act, but it's a habit. And I think people get afraid of this in the sense of, you don't want to get stuck in a routine that's mundane. And so the tips I'm going to show you are kind of two things: one to start your day and one to end the day. That's really about this self-reflection, as opposed to thinking every day is going to be boring and the same thing. Because as we mentioned, and as you all know, PMs, they are being pulled in 100 different directions. So every day is different, but you need to have your own balance that you can bring to that so that you can stay productive and creative. So the other thing to keep in mind before we get to these two things are the tools aren't necessarily as important as your goals are, right? You should let your goals dictate your process, meaning if you have a particular tool that you're using, and this could be anything, but let's say you're using a particular app on your phone to keep checklists of all of your tasks. Don't let the definitions of that tool kind of dictate how you work, right? If you are bending your own process to the rules of the tool, you're going to find that your workflow is now no longer in your control, and you may not be as happy or as productive or as creative as a result of that. So just wanted to throw that out there and keep that in mind. So the first thing, and I do this every day, I learned this on thedailymuse.com, but there's been a couple other articles. If you just do a Google search for 135 list or 135 rule, you'll find plenty of writings about this. But the idea is, come in every morning and you want to write out what's one big thing that you want to accomplish for the day, 3 medium things, and 5 small things. And so then the question is, right, what's big, what's small? You want to size by priority, not necessarily the effort, right? So if something's going to take you 6 hours, that may not be the most important thing. That might just be like, I have a million emails I need to answer. But the big thing that I need to get done is, I need to get, certain requirements to a member of the team, right? So like, what are the things that if you go to bed that night, what's going to keep you up at night, right? Because that then leads to being very unproductive, because now you're spending your entire night worrying about this, and you want to come in feeling refreshed each day. Another good trick is you want to complete the big or one of the mediums before lunch, right? Not necessarily get it out of the way, but get your day rolling in a good way where you feel accomplished. If sometimes afternoons often fill up with meetings. You don't want to be distracted in those, kind of worrying about this big looming task that you have ahead of you. It's great to just kind of get something big done out of the way. Another trick is putting creative work ahead of reactive work. Now I do this. I think it is a general good rule of thumb, but obviously adopt it to or adapt it to your own personal strengths. But in the mornings is when I feel most creative. I've eaten breakfast, I'm in for the day, I'm refreshed. After lunch, I get a little tired, get dragged into meetings, etc. So you want to do that creative work when your body and mind is ready for it. And so I find that's best to do it first, and then worry about things like email, managing tickets, yada yada, after lunch. So yeah, so that's the 1-3-5 rule. And again, you can look that stuff up online. Next slide. Cool. And then so I end the day the same way every day. And Dan mentioned this a little bit, and I'm sure everyone's familiar with stand-ups. Most teams seem to be doing them these days. Stand-ups are often done as a team in the morning. I'm not suggesting you stop doing that unless you think it's not working for your team, and that's a different story. But what I like to do, and then we actually adopted this, internally for the entire team. We do our stand-ups in Slack, so it's archived, and then we do it at the end of the day. And so there's kind of a couple things to unpack there. By doing it at the end of the day, everything is kind of fresh again in your head. What did you accomplish today? What didn't what weren't you able to get to? Let's make sure you write it down so that you can come in the next day and remember it. A lot happens between 5 p.m. and 9 a.m. the next morning. For those who are working real hours as opposed to crazy hours. But you kind of get that true sense of what didn't you do so that you can come in again the next day and kind of review that when you're making your next list. We do ours in Slack, and we actually do it as a team, so kind of everyone has visibility into how everyone is working. If you're not doing stand-ups, if you don't want to share this with the team, I think the big takeaway is just write it down personally for yourself. And again, the tool itself doesn't matter so much as you just having an archive of, this is what I did today, this is what I plan to do tomorrow, and this is what's blocking me. By having it kind of listed out and archived, you can kind of reflect on it as the week goes on, as the day goes on, and see what you got. But then, of course, we are product managers. We do want to use tools to get things done. So I think there are ways to kind of experiment and do this. Again, it's the goals that matter the most, not the tools. So you want to find the tool that works best for you. I've listed out some here. I've used all of these for this exact process. Slack seems to be great for stand-ups for the entire team. If you're doing them just for yourself, Evernote, that's where I used to do it before we were doing this as an entire team, or even just notes, something that you have both on your phone and on your desktop. Things, OmniFocus are both kind of get things done apps that are good task tracking for things like that. Paper, sheets, and any Google Docs, something that can easily be shared. Even Tracker, we've done similar types of behaviors right in that tool. Flow is another one that I didn't list here, but we use that, or even just your own personal calendar. Basically, anything that's going to, again, you want the tool to adapt to your process, not the other way around. So experiment, find the thing that's right for you. Because yeah, your main goal is having this archive, a running archive that lets you kind of check things off, feel like you're making progress, and then allows you to reflect back and see what you didn't get done. So end your day, start your day, with those two frequent habits, and everything that's in between, I promise, will not be mundane because we're PMs and we're putting out fires constantly. And I think that's my last slide, Andre. So yeah.
It was, yes. Thanks so much, Kevin. This was great. So before we go into my favorite section, the live questions and answers, so please keep those questions coming. We got lots and lots of questions already that were coming in. I wanted to take a quick moment and summarize what Annie, Kevin, and Dan were sharing with you. So Annie was talking about some product planning advice. So take time to step back and interpret what happened this year. I think we are always learning, always improving, and take a moment to interpret that so that you can take those learnings into 2018 and become a more effective product managers. And product managers are pulled in so many different directions, and we're busy. So make sure that all that you're doing is truly aligning with those objectives and goals for 2018. And make sure that not only you, but the entire team, as Dan was sharing, are behind those product goals, understand those goals, and the entire team is rallying behind it. And then do those retrospectives. Only if you do those retrospectives, we can learn and we can share what went wrong. It's important to share that. And then to revisit priorities. Things change all the time. So it's important to make sure that the current priorities still make sense. And if they don't be afraid to change them. And as Kevin was sharing just now, is create those habits that make you just a more effective product manager. And only if you do that over and over, you will establish those habits. I remember reading somewhere, I'm not sure to what extent it holds true, but it takes 21 days in order to form a habit. So create those habits in order to become a better product manager. But as I said, so now I want to jump into the Q&A session, my favorite session, and keep those questions coming. We're having people on the line and they're collecting them, and we're trying to answer as many as possible during the next 15 minutes. Annie, the first question is for you. The question is, how do you prioritize backlog items from 2017 when there are high priority items already existent or already established for 2018? Any recommendation?
Yeah, that's a great question, which I think has a multitude of answers. But I think the most important thing to do is to set everything aside from your backlog and really look at what needs to be accomplished. Set up your roadmap for 2018, and if those items do not roll over, they might not be the right items to work on.
Awesome, thank you. Dan, I think this next question is a good one for you. The question is, what is the best practice for reprioritizing product development while the product is already in dev cycle?
Okay, good question, and touches on a few things, and there's a danger of me talking about this for too long, so Andre, you have to cut me off. But yeah, there's, one question would be, well, what is the dev cycle and how long is that, right? I think it's best to think of, what we're doing as a product cycle rather than like we did the product things and we made these decisions and then it's off to development and now it's in their cycle and we can't change it. If we can come together more and realize that these decisions have to be made on a more continuous basis, then we will learn things as we go, and set expectations that we may have to change priorities as we go. Now, doing that so continuously that people can't really have any sort of stability, like we're going to start this feature on Monday and I don't know, maybe on Tuesday they're going to change their mind. If we sort of settle on a weekly cadence where we have these weekly iterations and, we'll do a planning session for the week, really just to comb over the upcoming stories, make sure there are no questions, maybe estimate a few of those stories and try and keep things stable, within that week, right? If product has some big things that they've realized on the Wednesday, it can probably wait until the following planning session, right? And then we can socialize it. We can communicate it to the team. The team understands the rationale for the change of plan. We've got the new stories ready to estimate, right? So that would be like a good rhythm. Stick to weekly cycles, right? But set expectations that things will always change because we're here to learn as a product team.
Great, thanks, Dan. And both Annie and Kevin, feel free to chime in if there is an answer or a thought that you have in your mind or if you disagree. So then the next one, it's probably a good question for all three of you. Maybe Kevin, you go first, and then we have Annie and then chime in. There were a few questions that were similar to this one. The question is, are there any suggestions or guidelines for assigning values to each story?
Yeah. It is a good question, something everyone kind of probably deals with every sprint, worrying about. I've worked with many teams over the past couple of years, using all different types of point story estimation. What I found to work best from that experience, and as the team matures into the flow, we just use a simple 1, 2, 3 point system. You could do small, medium, large if you want. I think the key is to have the smallest number of values to assign. I think Fibonacci is, personally, I think it's useless. I've never seen a team accurately use Fibonacci and have it make sense. If any of you guys use Fibonacci, I would love to have you chat me after this and maybe I can learn something. But 1, 2s, and 3s. The most important thing about any estimation, I think, is getting the entire team to agree as to what those things mean, right? And it's hard to tie those down to hours or minutes or even days, because there's always going to be some wiggle room, and there's people are concerned about being held accountable even though there does need to be some accountability here. But what you really want is just consistency, right? If you start off calling one thing a one, and then you work your sprint, and then you have your retrospective. If everyone agrees, yeah, we thought that was going to be a 1 point story, and whatever. If it took 6 hours, if it took a day, if it took 2 days, if that's what they thought that one meant at the time, that's kind of your benchmark, and you want to make sure you're consistently moving forward, sprint to sprint to sprint. And so that's why I think keeping the number of variables down is important, because then you don't have as many things to be confused about, right? Or try to, well, a 1 is a day and a half, but a 2 is 2 days, and then a 3 is 2.5 days, and a 4 is 3, like that, it just gets confusing. So we try to make every single ticket a 1. For us, that has been about a day. If something is going to take more than a day, we call it a 2. And anything that we don't have any idea how long it's going to take, we call it a 3. That gets them back to product. No developer works off of a 3-point ticket. So that gives us kind of just a very simple basis to go off of.
Great, thanks, Kevin. Hey, do you want to share how we do it here at Product Plan, or how you've done it in companies that you worked at?
Yeah, and I agree with the Fibonacci. I think that what we saw was that there was a lot of waterfall work, and people were trying to move into Agile, and Fibonacci was a really good way to get people used to the idea of too big and where to break things down. And teams are getting much better at breaking stories down, which helps keep your range of how you need to qualify things much smaller. I think the most important thing is whatever tool you're using is to realize that it is to make sure the right communications are happening around the issues, that the team is agreeing on how much work something is going to take. Although there is a new trend right now that the only thing that is predictable in a sprint is how much work you're going to get done, not how big those things actually are. So there's some changes there right now. But the way we do it at Product Plan, we take a look each sprint and look at which customer benefit we think we can deliver in that sprint. And that is that is our big item that then is broken down into user stories, and we make our compromises that way. And we've actually moved away from numbers a little bit because people got too tied up in them, and it's more of a conversation that we measure by sprint and by team.
Thanks, Annie. How about Tracker? How do you guys do it at Tracker, Dan?
Maybe just a couple of thoughts on the whole topic of like values on stories, right? It could mean point estimates, and the one thing to add, I guess, to all that is that the intent is that it's not about how long it's going to take, right? It's purely an estimate of complexity, right? Because complexity results in a less biased sort of thought process around it and conversation. And it's really just a signal, right? If the team feels something is relatively large, right? Whether it's a 3 or a 5 or 8 or whatever, right? It just leads to the next question, which is, why do we think it's so complex, right? What have we not thought of, right? Or if multiple people in the room have different ideas about the estimate, it means that people have different things in mind about what they assume that story entails. So if we don't have that conversation, then the cost of realizing that later is obviously going to be much larger. The only other thought is that sometimes we get asked this question more about, or in terms of, what's the business value? How do we quantify the business value of the story, right? And that's a whole other conversation. And that probably isn't something that we try to quantify at the level of the individual story. It's more at the level of a problem or a feature, right? And that's usually done in the context of trying to prioritize, like which problems should we try and solve? And that's where we consider, what is the impact of this? What is the business value in terms of what outcome, right? As well as cost. But that's probably a whole other question there.
Great, thanks, Dan. Moving on to the next question. This one is for you, Annie. And you mentioned that it is important to have a company-wide product update and share the roadmap, goals, et cetera, et cetera. Who does it in your company? The CEO, the product managers, the product marketing person, and so on. And how often do you do that? And Kevin and Dan, feel free to chime in if you have a thought on that too.
Yeah, that's a great question. At Product Plan, we do it monthly. All of the leadership team presents everything that's happening in each department and how that's aligned, including the product roadmap, to make sure the company knows what's happening. But I would say what is more important than who is doing it is that as product managers specifically, it is your job to make sure people know what you're working on and why. You might be the one communicating that. You might know that the product marketing manager is communicating that. You might know that your boss is communicating that, but you need to own the fact that that is communicated regardless of what that channel is.
Thanks, Kevin or Dan. Do you have a thought on this?
I think that aligns with how we do it.
Perfect.
That makes sense.
Cool. Moving on to the next question. Dan, that's probably a good one for you. You talked about this a little bit in your section. The question is, do you have any recommendations for how to conduct social retrospectives when teams are in different cities?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wish I had some great answer for that. But it's going to be a challenge, right? When we're that distributed. What we try to do is ensure that, well, that the remote people are just as present in a retro, but through our communication tool or video conferencing, some Zoom in our case, and depending on the tool, it could actually make it really feel like the person's in the room, right? Distributed teams, I think, do need to bond, and bonding is done best when in person. And so, as a product manager of a team, I would advocate for, some allowance to make sure that people can be co-located, periodically, to make sure that that bonding happens, that FaceTime happens, and that's a great time to do kind of a larger retrospective and really, sort of focus on the social aspect of the connection.
Thanks. Yeah, we fly everybody in here, Product Plan, at least a couple times a year. And we also have some social time on our Slack account in order to give people opportunity to bond. And I think that's always great. All right, next question is about the 1-3-5 rule. So Kevin, that's for you. So this person is trying to follow that rule as much as possible, but the question is, but how do we handle interruptions when you're pulled into multiple meetings? So how do you deal with interruptions when trying to follow the 1-3-5 rule?
Sure. So again, I think this is probably a great time of the year to, if this is happening to you, great time of the year to kind of reset expectations with your team. But the first thing that I think is the most important is you have to own your calendar, right? You own your time. Don't let other people manage your calendar for you. Meaning, if they just invite you to a bunch of meetings, right? Not physically, you have a assistant working your calendar. Own that calendar by blocking off time. I think one of our listeners actually chimed in with a question or comment similar to that. So if you have one big thing that you need to get done every day, put on your calendar right now for the next month, for the next 6 months. Say from 9 p.m. or 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. That's my time to work. You cannot schedule me for any meeting. That again is setting kind of like that frequency, and the habitual efforts will kind of be known across the board. Another thing that it's a little harder to do, but I think it's important to do, is do not go to a meeting that does not have an agenda. If you get invited to something and there's no clear, visible reason why A, you need to be there, or B, what the goal of this meeting is going to be, it's probably going to end up being a time suck. And that becomes a big distraction. Even if something's like a 15-minute conversation, it turns into an hour-long conversation. Does it even need to be a 15-minute conversation? Can it just be handled via email, via Slack, whatever? So you really have to kind of own your time. It's incredibly valuable, and it's a bit orthogonal to getting things done, but by doing that, you are carving out that space to allow yourself to get those things done.
Great, thanks, Kevin. Annie, this next question is a good one for you. The question is, can you talk more about prioritization frameworks? Any tips on that end?
That could probably be an entire webinar. It's something I think all of us in our roles get to speak to a lot of product managers and see it done differently everywhere. So it is a big topic, but I will make a couple of points. There are a couple of good resources out there that I recommend. There's a book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. It's at a high level, but it applies to all products and all product people. There's also an article out there, even over that, which I mentioned earlier, that helps define what you are trying to accomplish this year. Now, there is always business as usual. That's always the follow-up question. So what is a prioritization framework? What I am looking for personally is the top 2 or 3 things as a company we are looking to do to accomplish, and how my product is going to meet each of those objectives with 1 or 2 product objectives for the year. And then agreement between me and leadership in terms of how much we're going to invest in business as usual and maintenance. And because there's a lot of prioritization and decisions that need to be made there. And if you can come into the year with that understanding of what you're looking to accomplish, what you are willing to compromise, and how much work needs to go in just to maintain the business and where you're at, that sets you up with a good framework to evaluate all of the requests that are going to come in over the year.
Great, thanks, Annie. So reach the top of the hour. Maybe we do one last question. Dan, I'm going to address this to you, and Annie and Kevin, if you want to share additional thoughts, you're welcome to. Dan, the question is, how and when do you factor in efforts in product planning? Executives sometimes ask for effort required before they are ready to assign priority and not knowing what they would prioritize. Engineering refuses to spend time on figuring it out. Isn't that a standard dilemma? Any tips for this question?
Yes, this is the eternal question and struggle, existential in nature. But yeah, I mean, it comes up a lot. I guess our perspective on this is that there's no way you can know exactly how long something's going to take, because we don't know what the solutions are necessarily yet, right? The solutions that we might have in mind may not be the right one. So if we're going to sort of embrace that kind of lean product mindset, right, where we're going to empower teams to figure things out, talk to customers, right? It's hard to say, well, when will they be done? When will we know what the answers are? But it is important for budget planning, for aligning with partners and marketing and all that stuff, right? So there are ways that you can sort of take what you know today, right? And it might be a bit of an investment, like one area where this is done commonly at Pivotal is when we have new potential customers coming into Pivotal Labs and saying, hey, we have this product that we want to build, or we want to rebuild this product, or whatever, right? Something. And we need to get a sense of how much this is going to cost, right? Because we need to go back to our investors, have that conversation, right? So how do we talk about that if we don't know what's actually going to be built, because we're going to do this agile lean thing, right? So we say, look, we can take what we know today and we can go through an exercise where we'll spend a couple of hours, right? Let's spend a couple hours working through, what this is going to be. Let's maybe organize it by what are the main personas, right? What are the sort of key problems that these personas have, right? Maybe make a list of like 20 or 30 things, right? But sort of putting it in a framework of personas and problems or activities, right? Just some way to map the problem space and get to things that we can look at and put some sort of a swag around it, right? Like a guess. We don't do points. We usually think of these as like pair weeks, right? Because we do development in pairs, but it could be engineering weeks or months, right? Like break it down to a level where you have something that feels reasonably concrete that you can look at and say, yeah, that feels like about a 2-week or 3-week or 1-month engineering effort, right? But we have to qualify all this with the expectation that this is not real. We're just doing this exercise based on what we know today, and we'll see what that comes out with, right? So you come up with something, it could be 6 months engineering. So you say, okay, we really are looking for a range. So if we came up with 6 months, then let's assume it's going to be, 4 to 12 months or maybe 6 to 9 padded, right? And if you have all the stakeholders in the room as part of this process, then people kind of can look at each other and say, yeah, we came up with this. We realized this is just an estimate, but we feel reasonably good about this. So let's make the business decision based on that, right? Again, with the expectation that the reality may be different, right? Because we're going to do the lean thing, we're going to do the agile thing, and we're gonna know when we know. But this is enough for now.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Dan. Kevin or Annie, any additional thoughts on this?
I would just add real quickly to the way the specific question was phrased, where how do you know what to prioritize if engineering refuses to spend time figuring out the effort because it's not yet prioritized or a level deeper. I think if that is really what is happening, you need to, as a team, take a step back, because that problem is a completely different problem that you need to solve. And you shouldn't try to just shoehorn in effort estimation without getting everyone aligned. And I think going all the way back to Annie's slides, I think the even over X even over Y metric is a good place to start building transparency across the entire team, right? You want to make sure everyone's on the same page of what you're trying to build, so that when things do get to an engineering team, they understand the value of what you're about to build or what you need estimated on, and they need to have that kind of buy-in to that process so that they will contribute. It's definitely, and then looking at Dan's slides, when we talk about the collaborative teams, like this is a team sport, and you kind of need everyone on the same page. And so I think those tend to be some of the root problems to what seems like you have trouble just getting effort estimated into product planning, but it's really kind of problems that are further upstream that you need to look at.
Awesome. Thank you.
Agreed.
All right, this brings today's webinar to a close. Annie, Kevin, and Dan, thank you so much for sharing your advice and giving our recommendations. And thanks to our audience today for staying a little longer and for your active participation. We got lots and lots of questions that were coming in. Thank you for that. Obviously, we weren't able to answer all those questions. I would, again, encourage everybody to join our free Slack account, theproductstack.com. All three panelists are on that Slack channel, so you can address questions directly to them. And if the question wasn't answered, or there's almost 600 other product managers on that Slack account, and I'm sure somebody will probably have good advice for you. And then also, we will send a follow-up email later today with the recording of this webinar, and that also includes a link to the slide deck. I know lots of people were asking for recording as well as a slide deck, so keep an eye out for that email in the inbox. And we also try to pick a few questions and maybe further elaborate on that and write a blog post on that. So keep checking the different company blogs for an update. We probably are going to publish a follow-up blog post on questions that were asked today, sometime next week. And then also all of the three products have free trials. If you haven't checked out any of those, I would highly encourage you to do so. And this was our last Product Stack webinar for the year. So this was a very successful undertaking. And thanks to the Product Stack community, I hope everybody has a great holiday, and thanks again for joining today. Goodbye.
Thanks, Andre.